and welcome on in to the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast. Brett Malamud here with Zach Malamud, and we are on to Week 4. Zach, what's going on?
Not much. We got a late night edition of the Third Round Reversal Podcast. We're after hours, but we'll get to it. We got a lot to get to it in Week 4.
I think the fantasy football is always on, and so we're going to live by that. And we're doing a late night shift, but get your comments in, and if you have any questions of waiver ads or anything like that, feel free to comment along. Give us the likes and subscriptions on YouTube and Apple and Spotify, wherever you get podcasts. And we're looking forward to Week 4, and it was an interesting Week 3. I think for my fantasy team alone, among a bunch of the other ones, we had some injuries, and so we got to start the week here with Mike Williams. Mike Williams after the season with a torn ACL. Zach, he had an amazing end to the season for him. Catching an all-world performance, I would say. But what lies ahead now for the Los Angeles Chargers?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and it stinks for Mike Williams, 28 years old and still cruising along. He had a great game the other day, and just one play ended his season, a torn ACL and out for the season. I think when we talk about fantasy football, we have to, I think we look at Josh Palmer and Quentin Johnston, the two guys right behind him. I think they're in for a bit of an increase. I would say for Mike Williams right now, you're probably just dropping him in redraft. I don't think he's going to be back this season. And I think in Dynasty, the situation now really depends on what your team's really looking like. He's 28 years old, so it's not up there in age, but that maybe you could make a move after a while if you're maybe focusing on another guy and the team is willing to give somebody up. Maybe think about it, but most situations you're probably going to end up holding on to him. What I would say in redraft for Palmer and Johnston, I think Palmer is really the short-term answer right now, and Quentin Johnston maybe the long-term. So rest of season value, I'd give it to QJ, but Josh Palmer, if you're maybe needing somebody in the next couple weeks and you say, all right, I need a second wide receiver on a team, I think Josh Palmer is your guy.
Yeah, I think that it's pretty interesting as far as the Mike Williams thing. He had 7 catches for 121 yards and a touchdown. So, it was a pretty good performance to end the season for him. He did win me my fantasy. So, he did his job. He did his job. And so, yeah, as far as the redraft, obviously you're dropping him and, you're going to look elsewhere to pick it up. And hopefully you built some depth at wide receiver. But if you didn't and you're looking for that next guy, yeah, I'm curious what happens with Quentin Johnston, Palmer. I mean, it's clearly Palmer was ahead of Johnston. If you look at the routes run, it was 91 to Palmer and 38 for Quentin Johnston. And so, it clearly is the edge there. However, when you look at the target percentage and things like that, routes per target, some of those more advanced metrics, it looks like Quentin Johnston actually has the edge. So the higher ceiling obviously is there. I'm not sure they're going to really kind of just unroll him and kind of let him go. I think they're trying to take their time with this. And, so it might end up being where Palmer kind of slide into that, not the Mike Williams role, but a lesser role. And you kind of see the rest of the Mike Williams role go to Keenan Allen, which we sort of kind of saw last weekend. But, you kind of see Johnston slide into the Palmer role where he's getting targets, he's getting work, but it's not the work that you would be expecting out of a Mike Williams role. I think that Keenan Allen really is going to be the difference maker here. I think that as far as the immediate ad, let's say you need somebody for this week, I think it's Palmer. Johnson shouldn't be that far behind though. And so if you're in one of those deeper leagues and you need to stash someone and Johnson's out there, because of course he's added in a lot of leagues, he is a good person to go out and just grab the stash just in case he goes off. If you have some receiver depth, you can afford the roster spot.
Yeah, exactly. I'm really expecting Palmer to take some of the take some of the work off of Keenan Allen. I think Palmer, who's been there, who's worked with Justin Herbert for a couple of years now, I think he's really the guy that maybe the next couple of weeks I would be more inclined to rely on. QJ, I think, Brett, I really only think we're like 3-4 weeks away from really seeing Quentin Johnston be unleashed in this offense. I think they're easing him in. I think that's the right thing to do because they have guys in front of them who've been there and done that with Justin Herbert in this offense that can really roll when it's cooking. And I mean, with QJ, I think, like I said, 3 to 4 weeks, maybe if you stash him for a couple weeks now, I think he's going to have a lot of value in the next couple of weeks. But for right now, I think it's Palmer.
What's also interesting is that at the end of the season, Mike Williams had an out in his contract to become a free agent potentially as Keenan. And I'm curious if something happens based off of this. There were a lot of rumblings that it was going to be Keenan Allen on the way out, and Mike Williams will get to stay. I'm curious if this changes things a touch, but at the same time, I know that the injury sort of hurts the way that salary cap works and things like that with dead cap hits and stuff like that. So I'm not the money guy, but I'm sure that this will have an effect on what future plans are as far as it goes past this season.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's something that we're going to have to look out for right now. Like I said, I think you hold on to Williams unless you're really getting an offer for him of somebody who can really help you out this season.
Yeah, totally agree with that. All right, so we jump to our next one, and it is Derek Carr, who went down in the middle of the second half. Jameis Winston coming in relief. Derek Carr sprains his AC joint. He's considered week to week right now. And, now Jameis coming in. So does this change the whole outlook for Olave and guys like Kamara, who's coming off suspension, guys like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it affects them a tiny bit. I think the wide receivers I'll start off with, I don't think there's much of a drop there because there's really two main guys in this wide receiver room, and it's Michael Thomas and Chris Olave. Obviously, Rashid Shaheed has like boomer bust type value, but I feel like those two guys, Thomas and Olave, solidified themselves as the 1 and 2, and they're going to get targets no matter what. That. I think with Jameis, I don't know if there's much of a difference between him and Carr. That they're going to be slinging the ball around. Jameis Winston is one of the guys in the league, one of the backup quarterbacks in the league that when he's coming into the game, they're dishing the ball around like it's any other quarterback, any other starting quarterback. So I think there's not much of a change at the wide receiver position for these guys. Kamara is an interesting one because Kamara last year really struggled to get receptions out of the backfield. That was one of the things that hurt his value a ton. I think we have to see in the next couple of weeks of what it looks like for Alvin Kamara. And I think it helps his value a tiny bit that Jamal Williams now went on IR. Obviously doesn't have a guy really behind him. Tony Jones Jr. is there as well as Kendre Miller. But I feel like this is Kamara's backfield now with Williams on IR. The one thing I'm worried about, though, is the receptions out of the backfield, because that was a problem last year while Jameis was at quarterback.
Yeah, I agree. And listen, I mean, Jameis came in, he completed 10 of 16 for 101 this past week. I mean, pretty good. It wasn't, an outstanding performance by any means, but it was an average quarterback. And as far as Jameis's value goes, I'm not sure he has that much standalone value, but in like those super flex leagues, he'll be added up because he's a starting quarterback, and those kind of are like gold. But at the same time, now the Saints hand the reins to the 30-touchdown, 30 interception guy, the only guy who's done it ever in NFL history. And that season, 2018, he was quarterback 4. I mean, obviously there is some value with Jameis Winston and what he can do, and I would say that, quite honestly, it might actually help a guy like an Olave, a Michael Thomas, just based on the fact that Carr struggled with pushing the ball down the field for forever. Like his whole career, he's struggled with pushing the ball downfield, throwing picks and things like that. That was kind of the knock on Carr. And Jameis has no issue slinging it, just like you said. So I also think that, coming up this week, he's got a pretty good matchup He goes and he gets to play against Tampa Bay, I believe. Yeah. And so, that's a bit of a revenge game for Jameis there with Tampa Bay and, what that organization means to him personally. So I think that there's going to be a little bit of trouble now, just based on the fact that, listen, we didn't think for a second when the Saints roster came out there was going to be that many weapons. We were like, they got Shaheed, but then like Jimmy Graham scored a touchdown this past week. How about that? So you got Michael Thomas. He's healthy. Listen, he's playing and he's really healthy right now, which is awesome. He's cutting like crazy. And so, the Tampa Bay defense and the corners have struggled sort of early this year. And, there's a lot of weapons right now. So I'm anticipating. I'm not set really high because you don't want to do that when you're going to a backup. But at the same time, like I think that Olave is actually going to be good, and I think that Thomas will be good. I agree with you. I think that the running back situation is going to be a little interesting. I'm also kind of curious how Kendre Miller ends up factor into all of this based on his production for the last week.
Yeah, no doubt. And one thing that stood out was what Philly was able to do to Tampa Bay's defense yesterday. AJ Brown had a field day on the Tampa Bay defense. So, I mean, they're coming into a good week with Jameis at quarterback to get either Olave or Thomas a really, really good week.
Yep, get your lobster hands ready.
Oh yeah.
so we slide to the next one. We're gonna jump. Actually, let's jump to a question first. This one comes from Jay, who says, "Who should I start, Ingram or Laporta?" Zach, this is your favorite topic now, the Sam Laporta fan.
Yeah, it is one of my favorite topics. I think you have to start Laporta right now. It's very tough because Evan Ingram's having a really, really solid year. I think just looking at matchup, it's tough. Both of them, I think they're going up against pretty solid defenses, but I feel like Laporta, I really can't go wrong with him after what he was able to do last week. Yes, Ingram had, I think it was 7 receptions on the day. But I mean, Laporta's catching deep balls. He's got big playability. I don't know how you bench him. Maybe if you got an opening, you could put both of them in. Maybe a flex. You put one of them there and then put one of them at tight end. But if I had to pick one, I would probably pick Laporta.
Yeah, coming off just monster week, 8 catches, 84 yards, a touchdown, 11 targets. I mean, as far as it goes, when Amon-Ra gets 12 and this guy's getting 11, that's pretty good. I'm rolling the dice on Laporta. I think this is going to be one of those tight end ones that kind of out of nowhere, people are stashing them on their bench. Obviously, you had him. You grabbed him in Dynasty also, which is pretty great. I think that this is going to be one of those guys that Detroit's really excited about, and I think that it continues, especially as they. Obviously, like they got Montgomery coming back. I'm not sure how much they're going to be catching out of the backfield, things like that, like they were doing last week. And so, yeah, I'm going for that one. But thank you for the question. As we move along to the next one, Jimmy G. He got diagnosed with a concussion, and now we're kind of a little murky on who's the starter going to be. And is this going to really affect Devontae?
Yeah, I think it is, Brett. I think there's going to be a drop off because if he doesn't play, who's coming in? Mr. Brian Hoyer himself. So there's a bit of a problem there. He's been around the block. I think you have to have a slight drop off for both Devontae and Jacoby Myers if Jimmy is out this week's game. I mean, with Devontae, I'd probably put him on the border of wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 this week. Myers, probably just a low-end flex. I maybe avoid him if you could find other options. But Devontae is going to get his targets no matter what. I just don't know if it's going to be prime Devontae like we saw last week, where he's getting like near 14 targets, receptions, like a ton of yards and a touchdown. I don't know if we're getting that with Brian Hoyer.
Yeah, I mean, he played the entire game, Jimmy G, and so he actually was put into concussion protocol officially at the end of the game. Still threw for 324 yards. Like, it was a solid game. I think we've sort of figured out, though, that the Raiders are only going to throw to 2 players. I think that that's what came out of last week. And I think they're, this is the copycat league. And so everyone saw the Rams do it a few weeks ago. And now they're like, hey, we can do that. We can get the ball to Devontae. Come on. If you could get the ball to Puka Nacua 50 times over 3 weeks, then yeah, you're doing it. We're going to go to Devontae, one of the best guys in the league history. So I think that at the way that, yes, obviously Brian Hoyer is not your ideal guy. Neither is Aiden O'Connell. If he ends up being the starter, you would assume it's Hoyer, but you never know. I think that Devontae might not actually have that much of a dip in value in a PPR setting, just based on the fact that I think he's going to get a ton of volume, just based on the fact that they only want to throw to him and Jacoby Myers, and that's kind of how it goes. So that said, yeah, it probably is not going to be like those, 50-yard bombs down the field, but a lot of 10, 15-yard gains could end up being the game plan here if they go Hoyer.
Yeah, I mean, it's just something to look at because Devontae, I mentioned last week, 20 targets, 20, 2-0. So, I mean, they're really feeding them the ball. And they do have a good matchup, I will say. They're playing the Chargers this week. It's in LA, but something to really think about it if Brian Hoyer's at quarterback. Is he getting the same volume that he would be with Jimmy G at the helm?
Yeah, I think that I agree with that. And just from the standpoint of who are you starting, if starting Devontae Adams, obviously you're going to start Jacoby Myers just based on the volume right now. And obviously you're going to start Josh Jacobs. Like, I don't think really questioning any of those three.
Yeah, completely agree with you.
All right, so now let's jump to our standouts. And our first one is Keenan Allen, Zach.
Yeah, what a week. What a week. And we thought the week before was unbelievable. How about this week? Even better. Wide receiver one in back-to-back weeks, 18 receptions. I think that's close to really almost the NFL record. I think it was like 23 catches in a game. 18 receptions, 20 targets, 215. Didn't have a touchdown, but it didn't matter. He was still wide receiver one from 215 yards, 18 receptions. The volume is absolutely insane. And he's going to get another good matchup this week when he goes up against Vegas.
Yeah, I mean, what could you say? Keenan Allen is going to be that guy. I think, again, this is the copycat league that we're in. And so he had a Puka Nacua game, just plain and simple. He had a Puka Nacua game, and they're going to keep feeding him the ball. Yes, Palmer's going to get some targets, but at the same time, like, this is going to be Keenan Allen's baby and revolve their whole offense around throwing Keenan Allen the ball. Obviously, they got a pretty good running back too. And so, no knock on that. But from the receiver perspective, it doesn't really seem like they're throwing the tight end. They're going to throw it to Keenan Allen most of the time. Palmer will get some juice as well.
Yeah, definitely a guy to really look out for these next couple of weeks, especially with Mike Williams out of the lineup.
Let's jump to another question here. Back to Jay. Cook, Ford, Stevenson, and Harrison says he can only start one of them. Zach, where are you going on this one?
This is a tough one. I mean, obviously with Ramondre, you drafted him to really be in your lineup, but I do like Jerome Ford a little bit better this week because he's going up against Baltimore. Baltimore just let up a ton, and I mean a ton of points at running back to Zach Moss a week ago for Indianapolis. And I mean, why would not ride Jerome Ford? Obviously, the stats weren't great this past week, but he was going up against the top run defense in the NFL in Tennessee. Still put up 19 fantasy points, 2 touchdowns, 1 on the ground and 1 receiving. I like Jerome Ford this week over the other 3 guys.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I tend to look at the wide receiver, though. If it's a PPR one, like Jacoby Myers, we just spoke about volume and the potential that if he does get a lot of targets, he gets a lot of catches. There could be the potential there. But, I mean, between Ford and Myers, I think it's a toss up there over Stevenson and Cook, where I think Dalvin's, we'll talk about Dalvin in a little bit, but I'm a little low right now on him.
Yep, no doubt.
All right, so we jumped to the next standouts, and we had to put them together here. It was Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane, as we learned this week. Listen, it came out in the media guide that it was Achane. he came out, he said it was H-Chain, and then all of a sudden became H-Chan this week as he spoke with NBC, Peter King, I believe it was, NBC Sports, and said, hey, no, this is my name. And so we will pronounce it that way. Devon H-Chan, sorry, see, it's already forced a habit. Devon H-Chan, he rushed for 203 yards on 18 carries. He caught 4 targets for an additional 30 receiving yards. Mostert, 82 yards on 13 carries, but he picked up 7 of 7 targets for 60 yards. Both of them scoring 4 total touchdowns each. Zach, this was a complete blowout. And now these guys probably got to be in your lineup next week, right?
It's so weird because both of these guys are absolute monsters. I mean, I'll start off with H-Chan. I think running back 1 in week 3, 18 attempts, 203 yards, 2 tutties, and then had work in the receiving game as well. 4 receptions on 4 targets, 30 yards, and 2 touchdowns. 4 total touchdowns for this rookie running back who's burst onto the scene. And you want to talk about a field day. If you didn't watch it, go watch highlights of Denver versus Miami. And Miami, just this offense was in sync the entire game, every single down. This team had 70 points with still 8 minutes left in the fourth. They didn't get any more points in the last 8 minutes. It could have been a lot worse than it already was. I mean, Mostert, the same. Running back 2 in week 3, 13 attempts on the ground for 82 yards and 3 touchdowns. Then he had a ton of work in the passing game, 7 receptions on 7 targets, 60 yards, and a touchdown. The one thing I'll say is now they go up against Buffalo. And Buffalo, I've talked about it for years, their one weakness has always been their run defense. And can they really slow teams down in the running game? And obviously they did so last week. They shut down Brian Robinson. But this is a different animal with this Miami offense. There is not one weakness on this Miami offense. I think for Mostert, you have to start him right now. He's definitely an RB2 for me right now. I think H-Chan is a little bit more of a question just because I've seen Mostert the last couple of weeks and he's just been a monster. H-Chan, I saw this big game. I'd probably put him as a flex. It's a question mark because there's just so many options in this offense. I don't know how you feel, Brett.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of exciting. It's the offensive genius out of the Dolphins. And listen, we saw this thing before with Adam Gase, and McDaniel actually looks like he's giving him a run for his money as far as offensive genius coaching the Dolphins here. But as far as Raheem Mostert's value goes, listen, he's like you said, a solid RB2, if not a very low end RB1. He's that borderline play this week, and pretty interesting because we didn't really know what the value was going to be heading into this year, and a lot about his injuries and things like that. He's stayed pretty healthy, and so it is what it is. As far as H-Chan goes, I mean, listen, he just absolutely runs like a monster, just angry runs. And so, yeah, for me right now, he's a flex option and in RB3 if you play in one of those kind of leagues. But, he's right in there. He's probably going to be in your lineup. I mean, I don't know what your scoring is, but he's anywhere between 40 and 60 points, depending on what kind of scoring you have in your league. And so, yeah, you're not going to bench that guy again. You're probably going to put him in your lineup at some spot.
Yeah, something to really look at. We'll talk about Miami against Buffalo a little bit later.
Yeah. Now we jump over to the next standout, and it was Adam Thielen. Zach, he caught 11 of 14 targets, 145 yards and a touchdown. I mean, we talked about Adam Thielen again and again and again and again. Finally, the breakthrough, 14 targets. I mean, that's a huge chunk of volume there for Adam Thielen.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. We really just Adam Thielen is the old guy in the locker room, and we were waiting for him to really get going. It took Andy Dalton coming in at quarterback to get him moving, but wide receiver 3 on the week. I mean, 11 receptions on 14 targets, 145 yards, and a touchdown. I mean, you can't ask for really much more from this wide receiver. And you got to say he's probably the number 1 wide receiver right now in Carolina. It's a question if Bryce Young's coming back. I think if Andy Dalton is still at quarterback, you have to put Adam Thielen in your lineup. Bryce Young, I don't know. I'll still have to wait and see. I have Adam Thielen on a bunch of teams. I'll still be deciding on that. But if Andy Dalton is playing this week, they are going up against the Minnesota Vikings. The defense we talk all along about, start every single guy that you have if they're playing the Minnesota Vikings. Just go at it because they're going to have a field day just like Los Angeles did last week. I mean, I think it's a really good situation. Still have to wait and see on who's playing quarterback this week.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that even if Bryce Young's playing, though, like the coaching staff's going to try to game plan towards Adam Thielen. They used him, in not only long range but short range, and so there were a lot of good placements for Adam Thielen to get the ball. And yeah, it took one old guy to throw to another old guy. Andy Dalton got quite the view of watching Adam Thielen, absolutely torch some teams in his time in Minnesota while Andy was over with the Cincinnati Bengals. But, from the standpoint of his value now, I think, I'm at least putting him as a wide receiver 3 for this week. And if Andy's in there, I think he has the upside of legitimate wide receiver 2.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that it's quarterback dependent, but even so, I think if Bryce Young is at quarterback, he's still a flex play right now because he definitely has the value, especially after last week's game.
Completely, and unless you're on one of those teams where you're absolutely stacked at wide, like there are teams that are like that, you're probably putting Adam Thielen in your lineup there.
Yep, definitely. Let's get to the games, Brett.
All right, so we're on to the games, and we're on to week 4. Zach, Detroit at Green Bay, and listen, Jordan Love actually looks like he might be a pretty decent NFL quarterback here, and seems like he might get a pretty significant weapon back this week.
Yeah, it's interesting, Brett, and it's crazy that I'm saying this. I actually have Jordan Love as a streamer this week in his matchup against the Detroit Lions, who have struggled to really contain the heavy pass offenses and very big weaponized offenses. I think he's definitely a guy to look out for because of what he was able to do last week against a really good defense in New Orleans. Quarterback 6 in week 3. And the biggest thing that stood out to me was the running game. 9 rushing attempts for 39 yards and a touchdown. That's perfect rushing value for a quarterback and definitely puts him as a streamer this week. Like I said, against a Detroit team who's really struggled to contain a lot of offenses. I think depending on Aaron Jones playing, you have to start Aaron Jones. I probably wouldn't start A.J. Dillon. It's crazy to say he's just not been good while Aaron Jones has been absent. I think with Christian Watson coming back, which we heard, I think it was earlier today, that he said, yep, that's the plan. I'm going to play Thursday. Okay, well, that works for everybody, especially fantasy owners. I think if Watson's in, obviously he's in your lineup. And then it would make Romeo Doubs and Jaden Reed probably flex plays. I think Luke Musgrave still a tight end 2 with tight end 1 upside. I think Detroit's defense is definitely one that he could take advantage of this week.
Yeah, I think that this is actually probably Jordan Love's first real test, just from the standpoint of he's going to have Aiden Hutchinson coming at him the entire game. They're going to be rushing him like crazy. And so, not that I'm considering Aiden Hutchinson in the elite class, but at least he's in the very, very good class in terms of the pass rushers in the league. And so, yeah, they're going to be sending him every play. And so, how does Love respond to that? Obviously, it's a primetime game as well. And so at Lambeau, under the lights, that always holds weight in football and in the NFL. And so I'm curious to see how Jordan Love actually handles that pressure. And obviously it's a division game and they're playing Detroit. So, a solid one. Last time that these two teams played was a pretty good one and, a bloodbath at that. And so I think it's going to be kind of interesting. And yeah, he had 12 targets, caught 5 for 73. I'm curious how he plays if Christian Watson is actually back. Probably still a flex option. And I would keep an eye just on the medical reports of Watson. He says he wasn't medically clear yet, but he plans to be active. And so I think it's something worth monitoring. We'll also keep an eye on the Aaron Jones reports and what it looks like he battles back from a hamstring injury and what exactly that looks like. I'm not sure that A.J. Dillon really proved himself this past week. And so for me, at least, I'm not really looking at A.J. Dillon on the fantasy radar, even though he got 11 carries, even if he gets another start. I'm just not that confident in him.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And let's just quickly go to Detroit. I mean, Jared Goff has been a beast so far this season when it comes to putting up fantasy numbers, even scoring rushing touchdowns like he did last week. So pretty cool stuff from Jared Goff. Definitely a guy to keep on the fantasy radar. Another guy who is a streamer or maybe a low-end QB1 just because of the value that he brings in this offense. It was a weird game for Jahmyr Gibbs last week without David Montgomery. 17 attempts, 80 yards, no touchdowns. He had one reception. We're expecting like explosive plays from Jahmyr Gibbs. Didn't really get it. I think his longest run was maybe 22, 23 yards. Nothing crazy. I think Monty has optimism that he'll end up being back and playing this week. You got to start Monty. I think Gibbs, it's weird. I think he's trickling down into flex consideration right now. Because Monty's, he's going to get the goal line carries. And if Gibbs isn't getting those explosive plays just yet, then what is he right now in redraft? It's a weird one, Brett. But obviously, Amon-Ra St. Brown, you're starting him. And then Sam Laporta, I talked about it. He's tight end 2 on the year right now. You got to start him at tight end.
Yeah, I mean, Laporta just spoke about it a little while ago, and 11 targets, 8 catches, 84 yards, a touchdown. I mean, that's low end tight 1 at worst. Like, you're putting him in your lineup. He's just gonna. I think that they're really gonna try to win the ball more as they start to throw it over the middle, which seems to be the game plan. Kind of roll Goff out and strike whoever's in the middle, whether it's Amon-Ra or Sam Laporta or Khalif Raymond, etc. I think that's kind of what their strength was. We saw that right from the first game against Kansas City. That seems to be what's working for them. As far as Craig Reynolds goes, though, I think that was the big disappointment for me. Just watching, he literally did nothing. He had 4 carries for 15 yards. We were expecting him to play the Monty role. That didn't happen. I'm guessing that they really did miss Monty, and they tried to get Gibbs more involved and all of that, but obviously it didn't work. Especially in a full workload, a workhorse back role. They didn't want to do that. So my guess is that they're pushing Monty to get in. They're going to go back to that Monty Gibbs, sort of what they had going in week 2, where it was like 16 carries for Monty, 7 for Gibbs, but Gibbs also had like 7 catches. Like, that's probably what I'm thinking the numbers are going to be like. Dan Campbell relayed earlier today, that he's starting to feel pretty good about Montgomery suiting up. And, he's not really a guy that beats around the bush. So I'm guessing that Monty will be in there. And obviously, as far as the start goes, yeah, you're playing Monty in there if he is, in fact, playing. And then, yeah, I agree on the Gibbs flex consideration. But obviously, if the PPR numbers start to get in there, he could trend with the upside of an RB2, and that's pretty good.
Yeah, of course. Definitely something to keep an eye on, and probably a close eye on this week with Monty coming back into the lineup.
Yep. So jumping to the next game, and we're back in London, baby. I felt like it didn't take that long for the Jaguars to get their London game. They are going to go back-to-back games in London. And Zach, I mean, let's first start out here with the Jaguars, and ETN, he had 19 carries. But other than that, I'm not too sure that there were some notable things elsewhere on their team.
Yeah, it was a rough day at the office for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Got pretty embarrassed on their home field to the Houston Texans, and credit to Houston, they had a field day down in Jacksonville. I mean, for this week, it's basically press the reset button for the Jaguars. Just forget about last week. We're moving on. They're playing a solid defense in Atlanta, but I feel like you still have to start the main guys. Trevor Lawrence, you're still starting him at quarterback. Travis Etienne is obviously starting. I think Calvin Ridley's gotten a lot of hate the last couple of weeks, and that's fair enough. He's not been what he's expected to be really right now. Wide receiver 66 in week 3. It was a bad week for everybody. 3 receptions. He had 7 targets, though. People don't realize that. He got a huge amount of targets. It only turned into 3 receptions for 40 yards, but better days are ahead for Calvin Ridley, especially with Trevor Lawrence at quarterback. I think Christian Kirk is another guy you got to keep starting if he keeps putting up points, and he's done that the last 2 weeks. And same with Evan Ingram, getting a ton of volume at tight end. You have to start him as well.
Yeah, Kirk, 4 catches for 54 yards and a touchdown. The touchdown obviously saving the day there. But, yeah, you're putting him back in your lineup. I'm still starting Ridley. I'm still starting Ingram. I'm still starting Travis Etienne. Trevor Lawrence probably a super flex this week. I'm not sure that I'm, putting him as that quarterback 1, but just based off of the last week, listen, everybody got their workload last week. Nobody really shined. And so I think that, obviously you're putting Kirk also in your lineup. As far as the Atlanta Falcons go, I mean, they were pretty disappointing as well the last week. Bijan only had 10 carries for 33 yards, 4 catches for 27 yards. Drake London, unfortunately, he's going back to my bench, and that's just the harsh reality. 2 catches for 31 yards. Kyle Pitts has a pulse, and that was the big story for me this past week, as he got 9 targets in the game, but only 5 of them turned into catches for 41 yards. He's that cringeworthy low end tight end 1.
Yeah, that's fair. I think I'm probably gonna have to start him again because I've been riding the wave with Kyle Pitts so far this year. Started him the first couple of weeks, nothing, and I was like, all right, I might have to give him one more shot. And then he definitely helped me out in week 3. Like you said, 9 targets. I think that's good. It really just shows that it might be just a switch off between Pitts and London. Which one's going to have the good week? Which one's going to have the bad one? If one's getting points, then the other one isn't. I think that's just the harsh reality of this Atlanta offense, especially with the 2 guys at running back and Bijan and Algier. I probably have them both in lineups. I mean, you're not as optimistic on London. I think it's just a boomer bust type of thing. So he's a flex right now. And I think Pitts, you're probably going to start him again at tight end just because of what he did last week.
I should mention Algier had 7 carries for 12 yards. And that to me was like, And so, it is what it is. But that is the harsh reality when you're expecting the run as another team and you're going up against teams that are literally loading the box because they know what you're going to do. So it is what it is. And Arthur Smith has a work in progress, obviously. Jumping, though, right to the next game, and it's a battle in the AFC East. Miami at Buffalo as we hit the Sunday 1 p.m. window. Zach, I don't want to spend too much time on Miami, but you're probably starting all your guys, and it sounds like Waddle's going to come back too.
Yep, you said it, Brett. Tua, I think you're starting him now. He was quarterback 2 last week on only 26 pass attempts. You say, oh, maybe he's quarterback 2, 40 passes. No, 26, very efficient. Got the job done, 23 for 26 on the day. Really, really good. And then we talked about it. Mostert, I think he's an RB2. Achane is probably a flex guy right now. I think Tyreek and Waddle, you're back in your lineup. I think Waddle, if he's healthy, you're definitely starting him. And Buffalo, I'll move to Brett. I think Josh Allen, along with James Cook, and then probably Stephon Diggs. And I think that's it because Miami's defense kind of keeps things close and keeps things in front of them. So no big playability like Gabe Davis has the last couple of weeks. And the tight ends haven't really impressed me enough.
Yeah, I mean, Gabe Davis was a big disappointment, I think. Saved his night with a touchdown, but for the most part, didn't really factor. He's probably a risk to enter the lineup, but I think the intriguing thing and what was a dominating performance, obviously, if you had the Buffalo defense, you were pretty happy just based on all of the turnovers and the picks and the touchdowns and so on and so forth in a 37-3 beatdown. But James Cook got 15 carries for 98 yards, 2 catches for 14 yards. So I think that's pretty good just based on the fact that there doesn't really seem to be that competition there. And he hasn't even hit the end zone yet. So he's probably a running back 2 right now and hasn't, he hasn't hit the end zone. So if he does and when he does, we can have that conversation. But for right now, even without the touchdowns, I think the workload is giving him that running back 2, tier.
Yeah, completely agree with you. And they of course have Latavius Murray and Damian Harris right behind them. They're going to probably get all the goal line work, and that's fine for now as long as Cook just keeps getting that volume.
Yeah, yep. And so jumping right to the next one as we continue here through the 1 p.m. window, it is the Denver Broncos, who were just absolutely slaughtered by the Miami Dolphins. And then the Chicago Bears, who don't really look like they're that good of a football team, contrary to belief heading into the season, as they take a 41-10 loss to Kansas City. Taylor Swift, obviously, in attendance. That was the big story, I think, of their game, because it certainly wasn't the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, I mean, the Bears were like, oh, why aren't we getting enough love? Yeah, Taylor Swift's in the building. You gotta really zone in on that if that's happening. I mean, Chicago, it was a bad week, and that's what happens when you go to the home of the Super Bowl champions. They really, really hurt you. And while Chris Jones is on that defense, they are very, very scary. Looking ahead to this week, it's a pretty solid matchup because Denver just gave up 70. I mean, maybe not. You look at it, there's probably not a better opportunity this year to go into a matchup than the Chicago Bears have right now. I think Justin Fields, some people have definitely given up on him at quarterback. I think this is a solid matchup. You saw what Tua was able to do against them. If you're still having a little bit of belief in Justin Fields, I'd put him in your lineup this week. I think with the running backs, it's an interesting one because last week was probably a blip because they just had to throw the ball the entire game. They were down. I think Herbert, you're still starting him as that running back 1 for the team. I think probably a flex play at best. And I think the same for Roschon Johnson. He's going to be a flex play for the next couple of weeks. DJ Moore, it was disappointing except for the touchdown. So that really saved you there. I'd probably put him in again because of what Tyreek Hill was able to do against this Denver defense. With Cole Kmet, it's a bit of a toss-up for me because he hasn't been great. And it's not like we saw last week with Miami's tight end. I think Durham Smythe, it wasn't anything spectacular. So I think Cole Kmet, you're probably staying away. You may have better options than him.
Yeah, 2 things came away from the Bears situation with me. The first was that Justin Fields had 11 carries, and I think that was something we spoke about early in the year, that he's going to need to have those opportunities. Obviously, to be running for his life, and so that was sort of where a lot of the carries happened. But listen, if that's what it takes for the coaches to say, hey, he can run, they'll draw up some more design runs for him. The second was that the running back split was 8-7 in terms of carries, right down the middle, Roschon and Khalil Herbert. And so to me, at least, I think that Roschon Johnson, he's not rostered in a lot of leagues. And so he could be a potential guy to go out and get, only rostered in 33% of ESPN leagues. And so to me, I think that's a guy that you might want to stash as we go forward. Yeah, I would say those 2 guys are probably flex at best. DJ Moore, you're probably putting him in just based on the matchup and them coming off the bad week. But again, I'm a little nervous just based on the whole situation. And then as far as Fields goes, listen, it depends on your situation. You're starting him if you really don't have a good, solid backup. If you drafted one of those solid backups, then yeah, you're probably putting them in. Like if Anthony Richardson's your backup, you're probably putting Anthony Richardson in over Fields. Just plain and simple. That said, listen, if you're in a super flex league, you're starting Fields, no question. I don't know that I would push him in one of those 2 quarterback or super flex leagues. I think that's a stretch, and that's kind of where the line is being drawn with the fantasy community.
Yeah, definitely. It's something to look at for this week. I think for Denver on the other side, it's crazy to say, and we're a fantasy football show, Russell Wilson getting a lot of hate right now, just pure football fans. It's crazy. In fantasy, he's a streamer this week because he's not the problem right now, I don't think. And especially not in fantasy football. He's putting up numbers and he's doing a good job. I think going up against this Chicago defense, he's a streamer this week. Definitely an option to look at it if you're in need of a quarterback for the week. Javonte Williams, you're putting him in your lineup. Same with Jerry Jeudy, who really saved his week in the fourth quarter last week. Still a bit of a question, but I'm still sticking with him. With Courtland Sutton, he's been a monster, and he definitely showed that last week. Wide receiver 13. He had 8 receptions on 11 targets, 91 yards, and a touchdown. Courtland Sutton's getting back into flex, maybe wide receiver 2 conversation, especially if Judy's not putting up those big numbers. And I'd say the same about a flex in Marvin Mims, because I have benched him week after week, and he's made me pay for it because he's putting up a ton of points, and he's in my lineup in Dynasty this week.
Yeah, listen, Marvin Mims, he got 5 targets this past week. Only got 3 catches, but still 73 yards. I think he's turning into that deep threat that we saw like Tyler Lockett, to use another Russ guy that Russ loved to go to deep. That's kind of where it reminds me of. That said, yeah, Courtland Sutton has proven to be the most reliable pass catcher on the Broncos, catching 8 of 11 targets. I think that was pretty good in the last week. And so, yeah, he's probably, I like what you said. I'm going to stick with it. He's a low end wide receiver 2. That's I think the value for him going forward. Jeudy right now, listen, he still had a 5 for 81 game. And so he's probably even a flex option as well. Javonte, you're still putting him in your lineup. He got 11 carries and an awful game script. Just totally went out the window, obviously. So they weren't really going to run the ball and that kind of a blowout. But yeah, and then as far as Mims goes, yeah, I think that's an intriguing option as far as putting him in your flex. And it depends, obviously, of what you got there. But it's an intriguing one, especially in those deeper leagues where you're trying to find that gem in your flex spot, like the Dynasty League that you're referring to. Like, it's a pretty deep league where you got 3 wide receivers, 2 flex spots. So, yeah, you're probably putting them in a situation.
Yep, definitely.
All right, so now let's jump to the next one. Baltimore at Cleveland. And Zach, I think we kind of called something last week when we spoke about Lamar Jackson becoming the leading rusher in the absence of J.K. Dobbins. He rushed for 11, or he rushed for 14 carries for 101 yards and 2 touchdowns, in addition to throwing for 22 of 31 for 202 yards. Is this going to be the Lamar of old?
Well, if Ravens running backs keep getting injured, then yes, it will be, because they're just going to have nobody else, and they're going to rely on Lamar Jackson, which great for Lamar's fantasy value because he's going to start booming again, just like he did in that MVP year. I think right now it was a bad week for them, a really bad week. They got embarrassed maybe on their home field just because it very low scoring, couldn't get anything going, and Indy is just kicking field goals and winning the game. So it really embarrassed them. I think looking ahead, this week's it's a tough one because they're going up against a really tough defense, a divisional game in Cleveland against the Browns. I'd still start Lamar, of course. I think Edwards, if he's healthy, is a very low-end flex. I'd probably look at other options because of this Cleveland run defense, pretty strong, and what they were able to do against Derrick Henry last week definitely showed. I think Zay Flowers, you probably have to keep putting him in your lineup. The target share is just unbelievable what he's had the last couple of weeks. 8 receptions on 10 targets, 48 yards. Didn't get in the end zone, but if you're getting 8 receptions for 48 yards, that's good enough right now for a flex. And Zay Flowers is a guy to definitely consider putting in your lineup. Mark Andrews, it was a bad week. Definitely 4 receptions on 5 targets, 35 yards. He'll bounce back, and Lamar will find him in the future.
Yeah, I agree. It was a down week just as far as everyone goes. In standard PPR leagues, it seemed that Lamar doubled the next highest scoring Raven, and only 2 guys scored in double digits, Zay Flowers being the other one. It was a down week, just plain and simple. They're bound to have them, and obviously, when you can't get the running game going, and Lamar is your leading rusher, that kind of leads to that same outlook. But as far as Lamar goes, like roll him out. You're starting him, obviously, and enjoy the ride because he's going to run a lot. I think that they're going to, kind of go back to that. Even they had Todd Monken passing offense. I think that figuring out that Lamar's a rusher, Lamar's just going to rush on his own. Whether they call the play a pass or a run, he's going to run. 14 carries says it all. That said, Zay Flowers clearly the number one target, and to me, he's a flex play at the minimum. 8 catches for 48 yards on 10 targets. That's pretty good volume there. And I'm not really sure that anybody's going to challenge that. Like Nelson Aguilar keeps getting these random targets every now and then, but he's not going to. And yeah, you mentioned like it was down week Mark Andrews as well. Like you're still rolling Mark Andrews out there, and it's not a knock on him. But I think the number one pass catcher isn't Mark Andrews. I think it's Zay Flowers, and that's pretty clear the last couple weeks.
Yeah, definitely. And let's move on to Cleveland. I think Deshaun Watson, you're starting him this week. And same with Jerome Ford, who I actually benched last week in one league, and he made me pay for it because I started Brian Robinson Jr. ahead of him, and it definitely didn't work. I still won the week, so I'm pretty happy. And now Jerome Ford's in my lineup. He had 10 rushing attempts for 18 yards and a touchdown. That's what I was worried about, was this run defense in Tennessee. But then he also had 2 receptions on 3 targets, 33 yards, and a touchdown. And people were talking about Kareem Hunt coming in. Jerome Ford just took that running back 1 spot right back and definitely showed that he's the guy right now in Cleveland. Amari Cooper's been really, really good so far this season. Had a great game the other day. 7 receptions on 8 targets, 116 yards, and a touchdown. Keep putting him in your lineup. And another guy to put on the radar is Elijah Moore because of how many targets he got and how efficient he was. 9 receptions on 9 targets, 49 yards. He did have the 1 fumble that ruined his day. But Elijah Moore is getting into flex consideration because of what he's able to do in this offense. I think they're going to have to throw the ball a little bit more this week, just based on this Baltimore offense can definitely keep up with them in terms of points at a divisional game. I think Elijah Moore is on the flex radar.
Yeah, I mean, he got pretty involved with the offense. 9 catches, 9 targets. Like that to me is at least worth a pickup in a league, and you should definitely go out and grab Elijah Moore if he's available. Jerome Ford, listen, outside of that red zone role, I know that you were kind of bummed that he scored, but he didn't really do that much outside of the red zone. And so, yeah, the touchdown kind of saved his day, but at the same time, there wasn't that much, and we expected that. Listen, we spoke about it last week in our game previews of Tennessee and that they always have to practice against Derrick Henry, and so therefore they're probably not going to be unprepared to go against a guy like Jerome Ford, and they were prepared for it. And so, yeah, the touchdown hurts because it boosted his value when you might have put him on the bench. But at the same time, he gets a better matchup this week in Baltimore. That's not as scary of a front. So yeah, you're probably putting him in your lineup. And it was a good back week. Deshaun Watson, listen, it's not always going to be a pretty week, but yeah, he scored over 20 points. And so I think that that's kind of what you just want in a quarterback. So yeah, probably at least rolling him out if you're in a super flex league, and he's probably a low end quarterback 1.
Yeah, and definitely showed his chemistry with Amari Cooper really stepping up in these last couple of weeks.
Yeah, it took enough. All right, so we jump to the next one as we knock Deshaun Watson. Pittsburgh versus Houston in Houston. Zach, I think this could be a game where if you have the Pittsburgh defense, this could be one of those games.
Yeah, it might be because CJ Stroud is dealing right now, dealing the ball out. I mean, I don't think you're starting him. I don't even know if you're picking him up just yet. Maybe a stash for CJ Stroud. But if he keeps rolling like this, he definitely can put himself on the fantasy radar. I don't think just yet, like I said, but he's had a good past couple of weeks, and this offense is really rolling under CJ Stroud. Dameon Pierce has got to be in your lineup this week against Pittsburgh. I would probably say the same for Nico Collins, even though it was a bit of a down week for him against Jacksonville while the entire offense was rolling beside him. I think Tank Dell, your buddy, Tank Dell, he is on the radar. He's a low-end flex this week against Pittsburgh. What they were able they really couldn't control Devontae Adams last week. So that's something to look out for. Pittsburgh secondary, a little bit weak back there. I think when you look at Tank Dell's day, wide receiver 7 in week 3, 5 receptions, 7 targets, not a ton, but 145 yards and a touchdown. Big playability definitely stands out for Tank Dell. And I think in this offense, he can definitely get a lot of fantasy points. Like I said, he's a low-end flex this week.
I mean, what we say? Tank Dell is going to be a thing. Tank Dell is a thing. 7 targets, 145 yards, a touchdown. Go grab him. I'm still, confused how you could have that kind of a week and be only rostered in 23.5% on fan leagues. That's crazy to me. I'm sure he'll be a pretty good waiver target this week. And, he's earned. I mean, he talked about his chemistry with Stroud early, and even just right after he got drafted, how Stroud called management and said, "Hey, I want that guy." And they went out and they got him. And you could see why. Listen, they're going to keep feeding him the ball. Stroud had a decent game. I mean, 20 of 34, 280 with 2 touchdowns, 14 yards rushing on the ground. And you're probably starting that guy in Superflex just based on the fact that, it's tough. And he's going to have TJ Watt coming at him with, I think he has 6 sacks already on the season, which is crazy. But, I think that they're going to do a good job of protecting him. And, for Pittsburgh, it's interesting because I'm still thinking that I'm going to start their defense even with Stroud rolling, just based on the fact that, there's the potential that he can throw interceptions even with the good role that he's on. And so I think there's the potential that, listen, they're going to rush at him. And we've seen it with the quarterbacks just the last couple of weeks, even including Zach Wilson, who's in his second year. But, as far as how it goes, like, they're going to run at him with everything. Zach Wilson's actually in his third year, but whatever. He plays like a rookie. However, I think that they're gonna sink him, kind of test him a lot, and try to force him to throw the ball into coverage. And the Pittsburgh defense is an intriguing top 10 play for me. As far as Najee goes, listen, he's getting 19 carries a game, and he's still worth a flex play just based on the fact that he's getting 19 carries a game. I'm not sure that you can take that kind of a guy and say, okay, well, he's not getting production, so let's bench him. Like, you're going to put him in there. Could be a good game, though, for a guy like George Pickens, I would say, just based on the fact that the Texans cornerbacks are not strong this year. And so I think that they're going to take advantage of that as well. And then Kenny Pickett, you're probably starting him in Superflex just based on the fact that it is a pretty good matchup as far as the passing yards go. And so, I think that that's kind of the Pittsburgh land lays.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Najee, we're in that territory. It was running back 38 last week. I think the production is there in the running game, not really touchdowns, a lot of them, but he's really shown that it's non-existent in the passing game. So that takes his value and dumps it a little bit. I think he's an RB3. We have to put him in that conversation now. A lot of people drafted him as their RB2, maybe their RB1. He's an RB3 right now if this keeps rolling, because Jaylen Warren's getting those targets out of the backfield. He's a very low-end flex, and I agree with Pickens. I would also add Freiermuth to the list for this week against Houston. Yeah,
and, just go back for a second. He had 19 carries, and he had 65 yards. So it's like he averaged 3 yards of carry. Like, he's not what he was, clearly, and I don't know if it's just a confidence thing, but they're gonna have to start to figure it out there. So I'm curious if a defense like Houston, they roll him out to try to get him going, and they give him the same kind of value.
Yeah, something to look out for this week.
All right, so now we jump to Minnesota at Carolina, and Zach, I think that for me at least, talking about running backs, Alexander Madison, I think his stat line was a little misleading this past week.
I mean, it could have been, Brett. It could have been, but I'm gonna be happy about it as an Alexander Madison owner. I'm just gonna, all right, great. It was cool. It was a bounce back week. He was RB 10, 20 rushing attempts, 93 yards, got the work on the ground, and then I mean, in the passing game as well, 5 receptions on 7 targets, 32 yards. He did have a play. I think it was kind of a blooper where it probably ends up on not top 10 after what he did this week. But obviously, it was a bounce back. So I'm positive on the situation. I think against Carolina this week, you're probably starting Kirk Cousins, who's been quarterback 2 so far this season. So pretty good from him. If you have him and he's not, and you don't have Patrick Mahomes or Jalen Hurts or Josh Allen ahead of him, you're probably starting Kirk Cousins, I would say. And then the normal guys, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison. I think KJ Osborne's maybe a low end flex just because of the matchup. And then Hawkinson as usual.
Yeah, I agree on all fronts. I think that, just from the sense of, listen, Madison 20 carries, 93 yards. If you watch the game, though, they weren't like these really explosive runs. Like, I think that might be, telling just based on the fact that they do have Cam Akers there and they brought him in. And so there's kind of that leash. At least for this week, you're starting him at least as a running back too, I think. Obviously from a fantasy perspective, getting 20 carries a game is valuable. And so that's where I think that the value is. That said, obviously NFL coaches look at it differently than fantasy owners. And so if you give him the 20 carries and he, this next week, he only gets like 40 yards, then, there might be a change as far as Cam Akers' workload goes, because it sounds like Cam Akers is going to play this next week. And so I'm curious how that ends up coming to be.
Yeah, definitely something to look at in the future. I think right now for Carolina, it's Miles Sanders. He was running back 11 in week 3. Not too many attempts on the ground, only 9 of them, but the work in the receiving game was really, really good and definitely helps out his fantasy value. 5 receptions on 9 targets for 38 yards. Yes, they were down in the game a lot against Seattle, and that's why he didn't get as much work on the ground. But you like to see him getting those targets out of the backfield with Andy Dalton as his quarterback. I think you're still optimistic with Bryce Young if he comes back in. For this week, it's a great matchup. So Thielen, I'd probably put DJ Chark in flex consideration. He had 11 targets last week. Not a huge amount of production when it came to receptions and yards, but you definitely have to start him this week. I think he ended up getting a touchdown last week. And then I would probably say Hayden Hurst is in tight end 2 consideration. There's some people who are really struggling to find a tight end and may have to start him. It's a good matchup this week against Minnesota.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, Sanders, obviously, he's probably a higher end running back too, I would say this week, just based on the fact that, he is getting that usage. So there's a potential that he could exceed that and get into the RB1 numbers this week. I agree on Chark. Listen, 11 targets. That's telling you something. Obviously, we just spoke about Thielen and just a little bit of a deeper potential flyer. Terrence Marshall Jr. It's a guy who got 8 targets, I believe, last week. And so, listen, if you're in one of those really, really deep leagues, like keep an eye on him because he was a guy that a lot of guys were talking about last year coming in as a rookie, and he was banged up, and so he didn't really get a chance early. And now he's kind of rolling a little bit more into the usage. And so I'm curious when he does strike and he scores a touchdown and everybody goes at him, you'll have him on your roster already. So just one of those deeper, flyers you might want to look at.
Yeah, if there was any week to take a shot on him, it's this week against this Minnesota defense.
Yeah, at least stash him.
Definitely.
So now go on to the next one, and Zach, it is Indianapolis taking on the LA Rams. The potential return of Anthony Richardson for Indianapolis, and he's coming up against Aaron Donald, and so this should be a pretty interesting matchup here.
Yeah, it's not going to be an easy one. But if Richardson's coming back this week, you're obviously starting him. I think Joe Burrow showed that the LA defense is not as scary as a lot of people think after some really, really good games in the first couple of weeks. I think right now you have to keep starting Zach Moss because, oh my goodness, what he's been able to do. This guy last week, and I understand that it was Gardner Minshew at quarterback, but 30, you heard that, 3-0 rushing attempts last week. The volume is ridiculous. 122 yards. Then he got work in the passing game as well. 2 receptions on 3 targets, 23 yards, and a touchdown. Definitely a guy you got to keep starting. He was running back 5 in week 3. I'd say the same for Michael Pittman, especially if Richardson's coming back. Pittman's clearly the favorite target of Anthony Richardson. Deeper leagues right now, I'd keep an eye on Josh Downs. He's maybe a popular waiver pickup this week just because of the volume he got. 12 targets last week. I wouldn't be starting him because Richardson is going to end up coming back. So I don't know if that he's going to sustain that. I need to see it with Richardson rather than what I saw this past week with Gardner Minshew.
I agree on all fronts, and I'm curious to see what happens with Zach Moss, just based on the fact of he got 30 carries, and now obviously you got the running quarterback in there. Whether that changes a bit this week, and yeah, obviously yes, it was Gardner Minshew, but at the same time, like you can't discount 30 carries. It's pretty. So you're putting him in, you're putting Pittman in. I am curious what happens in the following week when Jonathan Taylor's active or can be activated from the PUP list, and what that means for Zach Moss in terms of his carries, his value. Whether this is a trade, obviously, is the looming question just from the NFL standpoint. But at the same time, like if Taylor is in there, how much long-term value does Zach Moss have, and is he a potential, trade candidate?
Yeah, it's something to really look at, especially as Jonathan Taylor most likely comes back. We still don't know. Still a big question mark. I mean, for Los Angeles this week, Brett, I think Matt Stafford's probably a streamer again, because although this Indianapolis defense is really tough and they made it hard for Lamar Jackson in the passing game last week, didn't give him any really deep plays, I think you still have to go with Matthew Stafford maybe as a streamer. Kyron Williams, same thing. You're definitely starting him. I think Puka Nacua, again, you're also definitely starting him. We came back down to earth just a tad bit because of the matchup against Cincinnati. They really did a good job on him. But Tutu Atwell had a really solid game. 4 receptions on 9 targets, 50 yards, and a touchdown. Maybe some Monday Night Miracles with that late touchdown for some of our viewers. 1 attempt on the ground for 22 yards, getting work in the running game as well as some jet sweeps. I think that a guy to look out for as a flex option this week. And then I'd probably say Tyler Higbee, low end tight end 1, maybe high end tight end 2, just because of the matchup against Indianapolis.
Yeah, I think that Cincinnati really did a good job of just beating the crap out of Matt Stafford best, sending the blitz at pretty much every single play, while doing a good job that every time that Puka Nacua would go at least 5 yards, they would double him, triple him. It didn't matter. He wasn't getting the ball. He does break away for 1 towards the end. Tutu Atwell, same thing. And it seems that even though Puka was being doubled, they couldn't throw the ball to Tutu because they were playing him so tightly covered. It was an interesting game just from that standpoint, and defensive battle back and forth. You saw the running game for Cincinnati not being able to kind of get it going against the Rams defense. And so I'm curious how that actually matches up here with Indy, where, you saw a guy who got 30 carries plus a running quarterback. I'm curious how that ends up being a matchup. But yeah, you're rolling Tutu back out there. You're rolling Puka back out there. Higbee, I agree, is a low end tight end 1. Kyron Williams, you're putting out there as well. And yeah, I agree on the streaming front for Matt Stafford. He's improved. He's pretty good. Listen, he had 269 yards and a touchdown. Yeah, he threw 2 picks, but at the same time, like, I don't know that he's going to get that much of a blitzing defense that he got last week, especially the talent that he was going up against.
Yep, definitely agree, Brett. Let's move to the matchup down in New Orleans.
Yeah, so we're moving on. Tampa Bay at New Orleans, and Zach, curious on the front of Derek Carr. We just kind of spoke about it and what it'll do, but just as far as this matchup goes, what are you looking for in a guy like Chris Olave?
I think it's just the same. I really am expecting the same from Chris Olave, what he's been able to do. Last week, 8 receptions on 11 targets, 104 yards. That was a mix between Derek Carr and Jameis Winston. So, I mean, no matter what, Chris Olave is getting targets. You're still starting him as your wide receiver one. He's going to be a monster, especially against a defense. Like I mentioned last week, A.J. Brown had a field day on this Tampa Bay defense. So something to look out for. Michael Thomas, another guy you're starting, had 6 receptions for only 50 yards on 9 targets. Obviously, the production wasn't great, but you're still going to be starting him just because of the volume. He's getting 9 targets. You got to put him in your lineup at least as a flex. I think Kamara coming back, he's an all go. You drafted him to put him in your lineup, whether it's a flex, an RB2, whatever it is. You're putting him in your lineup this week, even though it's going to be a little bit tough against Tampa Bay. You got to keep riding with him. I think that's really it for me. Juwan Johnson, maybe a very low end flex, but that's about it for New Orleans.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. Like you're probably picking up a guy like Kendre Miller just to potentially stash him, just based on we saw some promising things, but it wasn't like you're not putting him in your lineup. I agree though. Obviously, Arnave. Michael Thomas. Listen, Michael Thomas has gotten 7, 5, and 6 as his 3, or I believe it was 5, 7, and then 6 as his first 3 weeks in terms of catches. And so, I mean, it's good volume. You're putting him in there in a flex role at least. And then, yeah, I mean, you're kind of murky after that.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so
go ahead.
Go on to your Mike Evans rant here. Let's hear it.
So it's a weird one because Marshawn Lattimore is coming to town and he's going to be there again. And we've talked about the matchups between these two. It's not an easy one. You kind of always stay away. You got to put Evans in your lineup just because of what he's been doing with Baker Mayfield. I just temper expectations just a little bit because we always look at this matchup, and this one's in New Orleans, so the Dome's going to be ready for a divisional matchup. But last week, 5 receptions on 10 targets, 60 yards, and a touchdown. Just great volume from Mike Evans, and something we were questioning coming into this year. He's beat out Chris Godwin as probably the number 1 for Baker Mayfield in Tampa Bay. So something to look out for. I'm still starting Godwin probably as a flex. There's question marks because it is a tough New Orleans defense, but they are a bit vulnerable as they showed last week against the Green Bay Packers. Say Rachaad White, you're putting him in your lineup, probably a flex or an RB2, just in that range. I'd stay away from people who are trying to look at Cade Otton. I think he's going up against a really tough defense in New Orleans, and I'd stay away overall.
Yeah, I think Godwin, again, like you just said, Godwin's a flex, White's a flex. I mean, Godwin only had 3 catches, 32 yards. It wasn't anything special. He's, the upside's not there again this matchup. And so, yeah, you went on a tough matchup last week with Philly, but at the same time, I'm not sure it's getting much easier here, especially in the Dome. And so, yeah, you're probably not putting him there. Baker Mayfield, though, that's an interesting one, just based on the fact of you're probably adding him at least in one of those, deeper leagues, at least, even in one quarterback. But at the same time, you're not rolling him out there, especially in this one.
Yeah, it's just going to be a tough matchup for both teams, and stay away from a lot of guys in it.
Yeah. All right, so we jump to the next one, and it's the NFC East, Washington at Philadelphia. Zach, I mean, it was a pretty good week for Philly.
Yeah, I mean, they rolled along, and we learned something in this matchup. It's the running back room. Kenneth Gainwell came back, but it was still DeAndre Swift. The one thing that was weird to me about DeAndre Swift, all those years in Detroit, this guy was a target machine. The running back out of the backfield, just getting targets left and right. And something's changed in Philly because he's just a pure running back now. He got 1 reception on 2 targets for 8 yards, but 16 rushing attempts, 130 yards on the ground. This guy just proves he's the number 1 right now in Philly. And if Kenneth Gainwell didn't get injured, I think he might have just stayed as the number 1, and we may not have gotten this from DeAndre Swift, but he's clearly proved he's the number 1. You're starting Hurts. You're starting AJ Brown, who had a monster week, 9 receptions on 14 targets, 131 yards against the Tampa Bay defense. And then same thing with Smith and Goddard. It seems like one week it could be Brown, week it could be Smith. You kind of expected that when you drafted them. There could be one week where they both go off. So you're definitely expecting that with either one of them.
Yeah, I think what was interesting was they were covering Devonta Smith more than they were covering AJ Brown this past week. That was an interesting game plan, just how it lined up, just based on the fact that it seemed that the week before Devonta Smith was breaking free for these long gains, and so that was kind of what they were focused on. So a lot of short yardage with Brown, and that turned into 9 catches for 131 yards. So, no touchdown there, which is a bummer, but at the same time, I think that he's still the number 1, and you're going to get this back and forth week where depends who you want to cover will beat you with the other guy.
Yeah, an interesting one. And for Washington, I think it's just 2 guys this week. They're going up against a tough defense in Philly. I think Robinson, you're probably starting him, but probably a flex play. I think I wouldn't put him in RB2 just based on the matchup. He had 10 rushing attempts for 70 yards, 0 targets last week, which was interesting in a game where you would think it's pass heavy. Well, they were down against Buffalo, didn't get a target out of the backfield. An interesting one to keep an eye on. And then Terry McLaurin, even though it was a rough game, he 6 receptions on 6 targets, 41 yards, no touchdowns. You're still starting him, even though it's a tough matchup against Philadelphia.
Yeah, agree, and I agree on that on the running back room as well. Just note on Swift, he has 308 rushing yards on this, and that puts him in the 5th most ever by an Eagles player through the first 3 games in franchise history. That's pretty cool. Lions fans are like, wait, this is not who this guy is. Who is this guy? Completely different usage. And they're using him like he's Derrick Henry rather than he's Brian Westbrook. It's just crazy.
Yeah, very crazy. And it's something to keep an eye on the next couple of weeks.
Yep. We jump now to the last of the 1 p.m. games. Cincinnati at Tennessee. Zach, Cincinnati did a really good job of carving up the run game last week from a defensive perspective. Do you think they could do it again with Tajay Spears and Derrick Henry?
I think they'll be able to. I really do. I think looking at it, Henry really struggled last week. It wasn't a great week. I think if you're looking at Tennessee this week, I can only trust Derrick Henry and DeAndre Hopkins to start in my lineup. I think that's really it for Tennessee. Chigakonko's been on and off, but I don't trust him to really be my tight end 1 in my lineup. I just can't go there just yet. I think for Cincinnati, you're starting Burrow and you're rolling with him. He proved yesterday that he's still Joe Burrow. He may have a little bit of an injury, but he's still going to be rolling for the rest of this season. And then in the wide receiver room, I am starting everybody because Tennessee just gives up a ton of yards in the secondary. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd. I understand T. Higgins owners are a little pissed off right now because it was a bad game and one where he definitely could have taken advantage of it. 2 receptions on 8 targets, still 6 balls that really could have helped out his day. Only 21 yards on the day. Better days are ahead though. Do not worry on T. Higgins. And mix in, I temper expectations just a little bit this week. This Tennessee run defense has hurt every single running back they've played against in fantasy football this year.
Yeah, and I think that looking at Middens' day just from last week, he's probably still a running back 2, but at the same time, I think it sets up more as if he gets the volume, he'll hit that. If he doesn't and they have to abandon the run, then he's probably not getting that, which is why I agree about tempering expectations. We saw as they tried to run the clock out, last game against LA, he lost 5 yards just right away, in 3 catches. And so, yeah, I think that they're going to try to channel in on that. And therefore, I'm starting at all of the receivers, just like you said. I think this is going to be one of those games. And then as far as Tennessee goes, listen, this is, to me, the buy low window on Derrick Henry. I think there's a lot of Derrick Henry owners out there that are really freaked out. He's still got 11 carries. It's not like he wasn't out there for the bulk of it. Yeah, they were getting killed. And so, of course, they're going to start throwing the ball. They're not going to totally abandon the run. But all the Derrick Henry owners saw 11 carries for 20 yards, no touchdowns, and they were kind of nervous. Tajay Spears is getting a lot of praise right now. And, listen, I think that Tajay Spears is going to be a thing too. Like, yeah, he got 4 catches, but I think he'll be out there at least for a lot of it as we start to go to this new age running back NFL where, you got guys like McCaffrey this week, and then all of a sudden, like, Mitchell's in the game. Like, and that's that change of pace. We saw that a lot. And so, yeah, I think that's going to happen. Like, it is what it is. But at the same time, I still think Derrick Henry is Derrick Henry. So if you are considering, if there is a owner in your league who is considering moving him, I would take advantage of that because I think the value right now on a guy like Derrick Henry is really low. Yeah,
completely agree.
Yeah, and then, I mean, you're starting the regular guys like Diop still going out there. Okonkwo is still a sneaky flex option. He only had 3 catches for 7 yards. I think that he'll improve on this one. So, more of the deeper league, but, probably from a 10 team, you're probably staying away.
Yep, definitely.
All right, so moving on to the next one, the 405 window, Las Vegas versus the Chargers. Zach, let's just first jump into Vegas and what happens if Jimmy is there versus what happens if Jimmy G is not there.
So if Jimmy Garoppolo is there, then all things as usual. Josh Jacobs, Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers. Those are the 3 guys right now. Really got to focus on it. I think when you look at if Jimmy Garoppolo is not there, you probably give a bit of a boost to Josh Jacobs because you would think if Brian Hoyer's at quarterback, they're going to run the ball a little bit more. And LA's defense, they can maybe take advantage of it. It's a good offense going up against a pretty weak defense in LA. They've shown so far this year. But like I said, I said it earlier, Brian Hoyer's at quarterback. You're tempering expectations for Devontae. He's still going to get a ton of targets, but I think it's more of low-end wide receiver 1 rather than the high-end wide receiver 1 that we know him as. And then Myers, I'd probably put him in a flex consideration rather than maybe a lock in your lineup when he is most weeks with Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah, again, I think that the copycat league, it's going to be the Puka Nacua, Tutu Atwell, like 1-2 punch, and they're just throwing it to those 2 guys. It's sad for a guy like Hunter Renfrow, who was getting all that volume last year, and in the first 3, he has 0 receptions for 0 yards, 1 reception for 23 yards, 2 receptions for 17 yards. Not really a great volume at all. He's kind of fallen off the face of the earth. Just nuts to me. And what's so surprising is a guy like Michael Mayer, a rookie here who, had a lot of expectations coming in. He also had, no receptions in week 1 and week 3, only 1 catch for 2 yards in week 2. And so, yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting when you take a look at some of the other tight ends that were picked at that spot, just from a dynasty perspective, like Laporta, for example, was picked literally like the pick or 2 before or after, depending on who were ranked. Like, pretty interesting to see how that one shaped out, just based on the fact of Mayer had all of this hype coming out.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe somebody to stash. I would say Michael Mayer, just because tight end is so thin, especially this year. Maybe a guy to stash on the bench for right now. I think with the Chargers this week, Brett, Justin Herbert, of course, quarterback 1 on the week. It's just riding with him. He had 40 completions. So he's slinging the ball around. And without Austin Eckler, it made sense because Josh Kelly was terrible. And that's the nicest way I can say it. 11 rushing attempts for 12 yards against Minnesota's bad defense. Really didn't take advantage of the opportunity. And if Eckler comes back, of course he's in your lineup. You're begging Austin Eckler to come back because it's a good matchup against Vegas. I think Keenan Allen, of course, you're starting him. He's a wide receiver 1 right now. And then I said before about Josh Palmer and Quentin Johnston, they're low-end flexes right now because you don't know if you can 100% trust them. So maybe there's a couple of better options. And I would say Gerald Everett, just based on the matchup, a tight end to look out for.
Yeah, agree. And yeah, Josh Kelly had 11 carries for 12 yards. Was not a great option at all. I mean, any owner that had him in there thinking he was going to be really great was very, very disappointed. Palmer probably a flex option. Keenan Allen, you're rolling out there like he's, again, I'm going to keep using the name, Puka Nacua. He's going to get the bulk of the targets. It's simple. And yeah, you're rolling out Herbert as normal. Quentin Johnston is a guy to keep on your waiver ads for this week, and I'm sure he'll be added in a lot of different leagues just based on the Michael Williams injury. And obviously, you know, fairly well, Mike Williams. You did good for me this season, and you know, we wish you the best in your recovery. And so, yeah, had a lot of Mike Williams.
Yeah, a heartful one for you. But this is a good matchup down in Dallas, Brett.
So we got Dallas playing home against New England. And Zach, I mean, this is one of those offenses that's going to face the test, the Bill Belichick defense. You know, on the other side, I mean, we got Mac Jones going up against a pretty good defense as well. So could be an interesting matchup here.
Yeah, I mean, for Dallas, you'd probably have to say it can't be worse than it was last week, but it might because this New England defense is pretty good. So I think Dak is on the fringe of starting. I don't know if you're too optimistic going up against this New England defense and having him as your starting quarterback this week. But I think when it comes to Tony Pollard, he's in your lineup, 23 attempts, 122 yards, no touchdowns, but then 3 receptions on 3 targets for -1 yards. If that doesn't tell you what the day was against Arizona, I don't know what will. You're still going with Pollard. The thing about Dallas is they really need to figure out what they're doing in the red zone because that's hurt them every single game. And maybe Pollard will be able to grab a touchdown this week. Would definitely help my fantasy lineup. But when it comes to the New England defense, they're going to hone in on the top target, and that's CeeDee Lamb. So I think you're tempering expectations just a little bit for CeeDee Lamb. He's still going to probably put up numbers. It's in Dallas. They're going to be confident. They're going to try and bounce back after that rough loss to Arizona. I think Brandon Cook's a low-end flex right now, and then Jake Ferguson is a tight end on the radar because of the volume. He's gotten 5 receptions on 7 targets last week for 48 yards. So a guy to look out for as an option at tight end.
Agree on offense. I think that another guy just to put on the radar is Rico Dowdle. I mean, we spoke about him a couple of weeks ago. I think Dowdle's a guy that you should at least add from a deeper league perspective, or as just a handcuff for a guy Tony Pollard, just to have him because he's clearly proven that there's some sort of value. He got 8 touches, and so you know I think that it makes sense to at least add him to your roster.
Yeah, and for New England, I mean, Ramondre, you're starting him, even though it's a tough matchup against Dallas. I think you're probably putting Zeke as a low-end flex. He got a ton of volume last week, and they didn't want to throw the ball a lot against the Jets defense. But Zeke, 16 attempts for 80 yards, and then a reception even for 7 yards. So, like I said, a low-end flex. If you have them, you may have Ramondre, you may not. So if you don't have Ramondre, then you could have an option in Zeke to put in your Hunter Renfrow. I'm going with Hunter Henry. I will put him on the radar as well, just because of the volume he gets in this offense. I think tight end, like I said, it's slim, so you definitely have to look for one.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. It's interesting just how Zeke's role is in this offense. Like he's not being used just in the goal line, being used kind of everywhere. So yeah, there's a little bit of intrigue when it comes to Zeke. I don't know that starting though. He did explode for a couple runs against the Jets, and so he's interesting. But yeah, as far as it goes with the receivers and such, like Hunter Henry, he's your guy there. I think that there's not really much comparison. Yeah, Pharaoh Brown had a big catch last week, but I'm probably staying away from the bulk of the receivers there.
Yeah, definitely. I agree.
All right, so let's jump into a quick question here from a viewer. We got Joffrey Plays says, should I drop Josh Reynolds, Sky Moore, or Dalton Schultz?
So this is an interesting one, Brett, because obviously Josh Reynolds had a terrible game. Everybody picked him up. Oh, maybe I'll put him in the flex spot. Completely disappointed. A big fat goose egg for you. So it didn't help out. I think right now I'd just keep Josh Reynolds. It was a bad week. I'd also keep Sky Moore, especially in this Kansas City offense. The one guy that stands out to me is on my dynasty team, and I'm thinking about dropping him pretty soon, Dalton Schultz. I think just the volume in this offense is going to the wide receivers. They have a lot of young wide receivers and maybe some older wide receivers. It's Nico Collins and Robert Woods, Tank Dell. They're taking all the targets. John Mechie could take some more. Dalton Schultz, his most receptions was in week 2, where he had 4, and it was only for 34 yards. Not a ton. I think there's better tight ends on the radar. I'd probably drop Dalton Schultz.
Yeah, I agree with that one. Just from the standpoint of when you look like the Kansas City offense, like there really hasn't been the number one receiver. Like that hasn't come to be. And so he really hasn't figured that out. When the guy starts scoring touchdowns with certain players, like they'll figure it out who exactly he is his number one that stick there. Josh Reynolds, I agree. He's coming off a really good week. And so probably don't want, or he's coming off of a really bad week after really good weeks prior to that. And so, yeah, I'm probably holding him. And then, yeah, Dalton Schultz, listen, there's a potential actually buy low window on Dalton Schultz right now. If you were looking for a tight end, just based on the fact that, he looked like he could get some volume there. And then obviously the receivers. That said, I think Dalton Schultz, just based on the fact that the tight end position as a whole has proven to not be that valuable, especially this year. Like week 1, week 2, they were just kind of tanking, and Hunter Henry was actually, as we just spoke about, he was the top tight end, tight end 1, and so yeah, I think that Dalton Schultz is the guy there.
Yep, completely agree.
All right, so thanks for your question, and Zach, we jump to the next game in the final one of the 425 window. It's Arizona and San Francisco, and I mean Arizona just came out and shocked the world, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, what a week for Arizona, and because of that week, you got to put some guys on the fantasy radar and definitely put them in your lineup. James Conner's one of them. 14 attempts, 98 yards, a touchdown, 2 receptions on 2 targets for 18 yards. I mean, this guy's a monster. It does not matter who he plays. He will get the job done in this Arizona offense, and they're going to ride with him, especially as long as Josh Dobbs is in at quarterback. I think you probably have to put Marquise Brown on the radar too, because a low end flex this week because of the matchup against San Fran. It's not going to be an easy one, but the targets are there. No matter who they're playing against, he's going to get targets. 5 receptions on 7 targets, 61 yards and a touchdown. And it can't get much tougher than the Dallas defense. So he definitely proved himself in this one, and I'd put him in my lineup as well.
Yeah, I mean, Josh Dobbs is actually pretty good at quarterback. And so that, I think, was the big takeaway here. Everybody was kind of knocking Josh Dobbs for all these weeks. And listen, he finished with a pretty good stat line as far as fantasy purposes go. And so, yeah, interesting one there. I mean, not too many takeaways. He got 7 targets, and so that was pretty good. I think you're putting him in there. Michael Wilson only got 2 targets, catches for 86 yards. So a guy that a lot of people were hyping up. I'm probably just like stashing him. I don't know that I would put him in a lineup in any sort of stance, but he is a guy that you could potentially stash on your team. And then, I mean, I'm just rolling with James Conner. I think that James Conner has proven that he is going to lead this offense as far as production goes. And so, yeah, this is going to be James Conner's number 1 guy on the offense. And so, I'm putting him in my lineup this week.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for San Fran, there's another streamer on the radar, Brett. His name is Brock Purdy. Just because of what he's done the last couple of weeks, he's put up a monster amount of points. The QBR is way up there, and the fantasy points, even though like the rushing value is not there a ton, like he's still in this offense and getting his receivers are doing a lot of good work for him. I think you have to think about maybe streaming him this week just because of the matchup against Arizona. They were tough against Dallas last week, but now they're going to San Francisco. It's in San Francisco. And for that reason, I think Purdy could definitely have streamer value. Of course, the regular guys, McCaffrey, Samuel, Kittle, Ayuk's a question mark right now. If he plays, you're putting him in your lineup.
Yeah, I found it kind of interesting that after last week, Elijah Mitchell was dropped in 7% of leagues in ESPN, and I believe it was 10% of leagues in Yahoo. And he got 11 carries for 42 yards. Yeah, not the most eye-opening of stats, but I think the fact that he got 11 carries to McCaffrey's 18 carries is pretty significant. That said, McCaffrey's on a tear right now, so I don't think that there's anything in it. I think that you should at least stash Elijah Mitchell though, in the chance that McCaffrey does get hurt and the injury history, and we can go on and on about Christian McCaffrey or that. That said, this was the Debo game, and Debo got 12 targets, 6 catches, 129 yards, and a touchdown. He proved, listen, the haters are out there, but I'm still around. And, he had 25 points in standard PPR leagues. I think that you're rolling him out there. Yeah, Purdy's an interesting option as well, and you're putting him in definitely in a super flex league. If you're in a bind, he's a potential streaming option. But obviously going against Arizona, I think this will be one of those games where there's a lot of points on the board. And so, I'm also kind of curious about George Kittle, and he had 9 targets. And so that was pretty awesome. And I think that volume kind of continues as well. And then I'm kind of curious about Brandon Ayuk and whether he comes back. He was at practice yesterday, and so I'm curious what the outlook is now with the offense if Ayuk is in the lineup and what they can go with full force.
Yeah, really something to look forward to, and as updates come in on Ayuk. But like I said, he's in your lineup if he's playing.
Yeah, clearly. And so now we go to Zach Wilson taking on defending champion Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, I don't know if you listened to the Pat McAfee show earlier today. Aaron Rodgers made it intriguing that somebody was going to be in the building. Don't know if he was talking about himself. Don't know if he was talking about Donna Kelsey. Don't know if he was talking about Taylor Swift. But I guess we're going to have to tune in Sunday Night Football to find out. Zach, this is going to be an interesting one as far as the Jets go and what they bring to the table, because obviously last week they played New England not that well. They couldn't really get the running game going. They couldn't really get the pass game going. And, they still kind of hung around in the game because New England's not that good. But at the same time, can we really trust any of these guys?
I don't know if you can. And I think I've taken a lot of guys out of lineups, and I'm just stuck. I'm stuck between maybe Breece Hall, but I don't know. It's still it's very, very questionable right now. I'd stay away from Dalvin this week. Hasn't done enough when it comes to fantasy value. Breece can break out for a big play at any moment, so that's keeping my optimism there. But a low end flex at best, I think. Maybe you just bench him and find a better option. And then Garrett Wilson, you have to keep starting him. You have to. You drafted him high up, and the targets are there, even though it's not great. The output's not it's nothing spectacular right now. You still have to keep starting Garrett Wilson in your lineup. I mean, for Kansas City, it's everybody go. Let's do it. I think Patrick Mahomes, of course, he's in your lineup. Isaiah Pacheco, same thing. Jerick McKinnon is a flex option right now. I don't trust any of the wide receivers this week. I think New York has done a good job of shutting those guys down in recent weeks, and I can't really trust one above the rest, especially while the man himself, the man of the hour, or the man of the week, whatever you want to say, 400% up in jersey sales, 7 receptions on 8 targets, 69 yards, and a touchdown. with Taylor Swift in the building. That man, Travis Kelce, you keep riding with him. He was tight end 2 on the week.
Yeah, as far as the Jets go, it's very, very bad. Had the opportunity to actually go to the game this past week, so sat out in the rain, and we had the overhang, so it was good, but it was very bleak. Was I the only person who started Zach Wilson this week in fantasy? Because I had to. In the Superflex spot, Anthony Richardson goes down, and you're kind of forced into that spot. So, yeah, it was a cringeworthy game. I kind of wish that Randall Cobb caught the Hail Mary at the very end. That would have probably saved Zach Wilson's fantasy day. But it's all good. Listen, I think that, yeah, you're starting Garrett Wilson, obviously. Dalvin's just, I don't know if you drop him in one of those 10-team leagues, like he's a potential drop candidate right now, which is like say because of how far he was like a first round lock a couple of years ago. And so, yeah, it's very, very dry at the running back. And then, yeah, as far as Breece Hall goes, I think you really only start him at your flex if you're in one of those deeper 12 teams or more. That he would be considered in a flex role. And then, yeah, as far as Kansas City, like, I think that this is going to actually be a pretty tough matchup for them just based on the fact of the Jets defense is still good. And I don't think that this is actually going to be a blowout like everybody's saying. And yeah, they're double digit favorites right now, according to the spread. I don't know if that's actually going to be a thing. I think the Jets are going to stay in this game because I'm not sure how much they're going to give Patrick Mahomes. They're probably going to double Kelce for most of the game. And so I think it really comes down to which wide receiver goes off. And that's what I'm curious about. Because if you know about the Jets defense, they don't actually shadow receivers, they shadow sides. And so it's going to be interesting to see how they actually rotate the receivers on Kansas City through, Sky Moore, Rashee Rice, and, the works. I think that actually this might be a game where we see a lot of those dump offs to Pacheco. That might be this kind of a game. McKinnon, same thing. Even Clyde Edwards might get value here. That's where I think the value is going to come from. Other than Kelce, I'm not sure I can totally trust these receivers against a really good secondary.
Yep, definitely agree with you.
All right, so we got another viewer question, and Zach, I think this is an interesting one. I got offered Anthony Richardson, Zach Moss, and Garrett Wilson for Josh Jacobs. What should I do? One quarterback, I'm assuming this is.
I'm going to assume it's one quarterback, and it also depends if you have a good quarterback or not right now, because if you're getting Anthony Richardson, you're probably putting him in as your number one. Zach Moss is an interesting one because I think the rest of season value is nothing because, right now it's a question mark with Jonathan Taylor, but compared to other running backs like Josh Jacobs clearly wins the rest of season value. And Garrett Wilson, who we just talked about, and you're still starting him, but it's going to be a little bit tough. I think it really depends on, number one, who your quarterback is. And if Anthony Richardson slots in right away, then definitely take the deal. And then Garrett Wilson, if he's adding to your wide receiver depth, if you have maybe a running back behind Josh Jacobs that you maybe rely on, I'd probably take the deal depending on those situations, bro.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it really just comes down to, what does your depth look like at running back? Because I am very unsure about the Jonathan Taylor is going to get traded just based on he's not going to go to Miami anymore. And I think that was the biggest spot that they looked at. And Miami's pretty set right now at running back. I don't know that he's going to get traded there. As far as the quarterback situation goes, yeah, it depends on who you have. If you have Pat Mahomes or one of those top end quarterbacks, you're probably not going to want Anthony Richardson. And listen, Josh Jacobs is going to get volume, especially if a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo is hurt for an extended period of time. Obviously concussion protocol isn't what it was even last year. After the Tua injury, I think that it's sort of changed and worked on that in the offseason where you're going to definitely miss a game. We just saw it with Anthony Richardson. He looked fine on the sidelines and you wouldn't know that he had a concussion, yet they kept him out because of this whole precautionary approach that they're taking to the concussion protocol, where you have to, there's like 12 different steps for you to actually get back into the game. And practicing is literally like the 9th step, and you have to pass 3 more steps after that.
Yeah, I mean, if he's playing this week, though, then, I mean, it's you got to start him. And if it's a trade, you probably have to take him if you need him at quarterback.
Yeah, clearly. So now we jump over to our next game and our final game of week 4. And Zach, we're back at MetLife Stadium after the Kansas City Jets game the next night, where we see the Seattle Seahawks taking on the Giants. You know, the 2 nights at MetLife Stadium, I'm curious if the field has an effect. Well, we sort of saw it in week 1 with the Aaron Rodgers thing. They played the night before with the Giants, and the field was already used, and, you know, not going to make excuses. And obviously it rained with the Aaron Rodgers injury, but, you know, you cringe when you see that it's now happening again just a few weeks later, a second game, Monday Night Football. Zach, what are we looking for, though, as far as Seattle goes? I think that it's pretty fair to say that Kenneth Walker's the number 1 guy, and I don't know that Charbonnet really has a competition on him.
Yeah, I agree with you for right now. In the first like 6-7 weeks of the season, I do think, Brett, that we could see an uptick pretty soon for Charbonnet and getting him involved, because in this game it was weird. Charbonnet was getting a fair amount of carries. It just didn't turn into anything spectacular. Walker got the goal line carries. Walker got the really important carries, but Charbonnet was getting carries and was on the field for a fair amount of snaps. So he is getting his reps, something to look out for. But like I said, first 6 or 7 weeks, you're definitely rolling with Walker. You maybe keep an eye on Charbonnet and what's going on in Seattle as we get later into the season. But right now, I think Geno Smith's on the radar for a start in fantasy this week. He's going up against this Giants defense that has struggled a lot so far this year to control opposing offenses. 3 games, Dallas, Arizona, and San Fran. They've all taken advantage of this defense. And I think it's all go for DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jackson Smith in Jigba. Metcalf last week, 6 receptions, 8 targets for 112 yards. Lockett, not a great game last week. And then Smith and Jigba, I think he's a low-end flex this week against this Giants defense.
Yeah, Charbonnet had that carry from the 14-yard line. He almost scored. He had a 12-yarder. He got forced out at the 2. He pummeled the guy. I don't know if you could go look up the replay. Absolutely pummeled the guy. It was awesome to see. But yeah, I mean, Kenneth Walker, 18 carries, 97 yards, 2 touchdowns. He had 30 points in standard PPR league, 3 catches for almost 60 yards. So that's pretty good usage there. I think that that's going to continue. And yeah, I agree. I think that Charbonnet is going to start to kind of come into his own a little bit. Thing I was kind of surprised about last week, you know, JSN only 1 catch for 10 yards, 3 targets, but only 1 catch for 10 yards. So not the usage you want to see from the rookie. And, you know, he got out scored by Jake Bobo, which I thought that was pretty funny, you know, as a wide receiver. But yeah, Tyler Lockett, I mean, not the game for him, 7 targets, only 3 catches. So, you kind of, you know, breathe heavily about putting him in. You probably put him in because of the upside. DK, you're putting him in, obviously. And I think that it's a really good matchup this week for the receiver game, just based on the fact that those rookie corners they keep rolling out these rookie corners every week, the Giants, and they keep getting torched, and then they keep coming back out. So DK is going to feast this week. Lockett's going to feast this week. Curious if JSN has a role. Obviously, like, you're not putting him in, but I would get starting Geno Smith in a what could be a really strong week for him. I would say you probably start him with confidence.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, for New York, we're expecting a lot of points in this game. I would probably say both these offenses can continue to really roll. It's the defenses that for both teams that are struggling so far this season. The question right now for New York is Saquon, and is he going to play? Is he going to be healthy again? Is he going to be back in practice this week? a lot of question marks. They were trying to rush him for that game against San Francisco, and I said, wait, hold on a minute, and ruled him out right before our last episode. And then Matt Breida played. He got a touchdown in the end. That probably saved the day if you ended up starting him against San Francisco. I think if Saquon's not playing, Breida's a low end flex, nothing spectacular. I think it's weird right now because I feel like Daniel Jones will still take a fair amount of carries. He didn't last week because San Francisco's defense did a good job of pinning him in. But I think against Seattle, he has a lot of more room and can take advantage of it. The only other guy I would think about is Darren Waller, who really struggled to bring in the ball last week, could not catch it. And it really hurt a lot of people's fantasy weeks. Only 3 receptions for 20 yards, but he had 7 targets. So the targets were there, just couldn't make the most of them. Just trying to build that connection still with Daniel Jones. And I'd still be starting him as a tight end 1 this week.
Yeah, and Daniel Jones, just an absolutely abysmal performance. Just, you're probably not playing him. Just plain and simple. I don't know that I can trust him this week. Even in super flex, I'm probably just leaving him on the bench if you have a better option. Listen, he scored under 5 points in 2 of the 3 weeks. And yeah, he scored 30 that week, so that was pretty good. But you're probably leaving him on the bench just until he can actually prove that he's going to score those points. Yes, and Waller was just that was awful to see. He couldn't bring the ball in, and so I think that's going to be a thing that teams channel in on is beat us with one of your receivers because the receivers really haven't proven themselves to do much of anything. Their highest receiver from this past week was Darius Slayton, who had 32 yards on 3 catches. So not great. I'm unsure about this whole team. I'm probably not starting any of them with the exception of Waller as probably a lower end tight end 1, just based on, again, on the position, and it is weak, and he's getting the volume and hopefully he can bring the catches in. But other than that, I don't know that I can even start Breida. He's very risky for me. I think that even if Saquon comes in, Breida might have a role just based on the fact that a high ankle sprain, you can't really come back from it that quickly. I don't believe that Saquon will be at 100% even if he can go on Monday Night Football.
Yeah, something to keep an eye on. And maybe it's a weird situation because Saquon, obviously, you're probably going to look later in the week because it's a Monday night game. It's similar to Joe Burrow last week. Or you may have to make a decision. Am I going with him or am I not? Well, hopefully you'll get some more clarity on it later in the week.
Yep. So now let's move on to our locks of the week. These are the guys that you want to start in your flex spot. And Zach, last week it was a pretty good week to pick Tutu Atwell as I took him and got 17.2 PPR points. You had Nick Collins for 5.4. And so I go up 2-1 in the standings there. So I'll take the first pick here. I'm going to take
I go.
No. You have 2-1. You have 2-1. Sorry. You have 2-0. And so now you're at 2-1. I'm going to take Tank Dell here. I think that Tank Dell has proven that he's going to be a thing for the season. And plain and simple, I don't know how I could shy away from a guy like Tank Dell just right now. Just the amount of volume that he's getting, the amount of targets that he's getting. He had 7 targets, 145 yards, and a touchdown. I still don't understand how there's nobody picking this guy up. How do you not grab him? And I'm holding my breath because we're only a few hours away from when the waiver wires process, and I'm sure he'll be added in a bunch of leagues. But if you're looking at a potential waiver target now in the next couple hours, like go grab him if he's out there and you have a high priority because he's going to be a thing. And again, CJ Stroud, the knock of CJ Stroud, I don't know that it totally holds that much weight. I think he's been pretty solid for him. And so I think it's a good matchup for him as well. And, that's why I'm taking him.
And Brett, I'm going with Adam Thielen. And why not after last week? Just an unbelievable performance. I mentioned it earlier. He was wide receiver 3 on the day in week 3. And I mean, unbelievable stat line that he put up. Still a question if Bryce Young is going to be as a starter or is Andy Dalton going to keep things going. Bryce Young coming back from an injury. It doesn't matter to me. I think Adam Thielen proved that he's the number one guy. And what better week than this week where he goes up against Minnesota, who literally let 2 wide receivers in Keenan Allen and Mike Williams before he got injured. They went absolutely off against this defense last week. I'm rolling with Adam Thielen. They're at home now against Minnesota. I'm all in on Adam Thielen this week.
Yeah, I think Adam Thielen is a good pick, at least from the standpoint of like, listen, the volume's there. It depends on the quarterback. We just spoke about it before. Like, if Andy Dalton's in there, there's a chance that he finishes in that wide receiver 1 range. Like, there is the potential that happens. And so, yeah, that the AARP community is definitely rooting for him as the older guys. We go on now to the ones to watch. These are guys that will end up being a waiver target in the following week. And so, you could go out and try to scoop them up right now. Zach Ertz last week, who finished with 2.6 PPR points. I took Jaylen Warren, who had 8.2, so I go up 2-1 on this one. This week, I'm taking Roschon Johnson. And, a guy who had 8 carries. Yes, he only had 38 yards on it. Yes, he only had 2 catches for 11 yards. That said, I think that this is a guy who's available in pretty much 70-ish% of leagues, a little less than 70% of leagues. And I mean, the knock on him was that he has to sit second to Khalil Herbert. Listen, he sat second to Bijan Robinson in his time in Texas, and he did just fine. And so I think that the role will continue to grow for him as they kind of go by committee. Listen, Bears are in an exciting offense as it is right now, and it's a kind of a buy low type thing. But at the same time, I think Roschon's role is going to grow, especially in the passing game, as they can't really pass it that far down the field. A couple matchups coming up in the next couple of weeks: Denver and Washington and Minnesota. And so I think that there's the potential that there is that bio is right now where you can get Roschon for free if he's out there on waivers.
Yeah, definitely a guy to look out for, and probably going to get an uptick pretty soon ahead of Khalil Herbert in this Bears backfield. We're just waiting for it. I think for me, we're on opposite sides of this matchup this week between the Broncos and the Bears. I'm taking Marvin Mims, and Marvin Mims probably should be added this week after what he's been doing the last couple of weeks. But for right now, he's at 27% owned by people. I think he's definitely going to be added. There's going to be some tough matchups coming up, but even so, Russ has shown that he's going to sling the ball around. And Marvin Mims, you mentioned it before, that Tyler Lockett type player, the deep threat. I think Marvin Mims, I have him in Superflex Dynasty. I'm really riding high on him right now. He's been on a good stretch. If it's not this week, definitely next week. Be prepared to grab Marvin Mims and add him to your roster.
Yeah, I think that Mims is a really good potential addition, just from the standpoint of there's that big playability. I think that Russ has proven over his time that he really likes to go deep on a lot of those shots. Mims keeps catching those balls. He's going to keep going to them. I think back to that Tyler Lockett. And yeah, Tyler Lockett, those whole seasons, like there was one year where half of his points came on 50-yard or more plays. And so, yeah, I mean, Mims could end up being that guy. But I think in the grand scheme of things, Mims is a potential option that could potentially turn into a pretty good wide receiver 3 range, depending on if he can get that volume and can continue to connect on those.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Brett.
Yeah, so now that's it. We are wrapping it up here. Next week, we will take a look at week 4 and then preview on to week 5 as we start to get into the bye week. Zach, I mean, I'm excited about the bye weeks and trying to figure out and navigate your roster as you try to piece that puzzle together. Please subscribe to us on wherever you get your podcast. Give us the thumbs up. And in the words of Aaron Rodgers, the night is darkest before the dawn, and we will rise yet again. We will catch you next week on the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast with Brett Malamud and Zach Malamud. We'll catch you next week.